So far, we've been talking about problems with the use of punishment, but there are some benefits to using punishment, and there are ways to use punishment effectively to maximize its benefits. The first benefit of punishment is that punishment can sometimes lead to an increase in social behavior. So sometimes after a child is punished, you can see them being especially, affectionate toward their parent or toward their peers or their siblings. And the reason for this is that after getting punished, people tend to want to repair relationships. They want to make sure that they're still in good standing with the people around them. So you may see them increase their social behaviors in order to make sure that those behaviors, or excuse me, in order to make sure that those relationships are repaired or still, intact. Punishment, strangely enough, can sometimes result in an improvement in mood, such as less crying. So I'm sure you've all seen, particularly in old movies, somebody can be hysterical and screaming and be upset, and then somebody slaps them, and they immediately calm down or stop that behavior. And so this is because sometimes punishment can serve as a distraction. It can distract a person out of crying or distract them out of like a bad mood. So it kind of just calls them to attention and stops that upset behavior. And so that comes across as an improvement in mood as a result of punishment. Punishment can also increase attention to the environment. So, of course, if you're being punished, you're going to become more vigilant. You're going to pay more attention to what's going on around you. You're really on the lookout for more punishment, but this can help children who tend to be distracted, who tend to not really be paying attention to their environment. It can help them to attend and to pay attention to their environment, to people around them, to pay more attention to cues so they do become more attentive as a result of punishment. So if you're going to choose to use punishment, there are ways that you can use it to help it be most effective. And so the first thing is, as much as possible, you want the punishment to immediately follow the behavior. You want it to be immediate rather than delayed. Just like we talked about with reinforcement, the reinforcement needs to come as soon as possible after the behavior. The same is true of punishment. It needs to come as soon as possible after the target behavior. If there is a long period of time between the misbehavior and the punishment, the child is going to have a very hard time connecting that punishment to the misbehavior that is supposed to decrease. Just like adults with the judicial system, if you break a law, you're not going to get punished for breaking that law for months or even years after that crime is committed. It's very unlikely to have an effect in decreasing that behavior. You want the punishment to immediately follow the behavior that you're trying to decrease through punishment. At least in the beginning, the punishment should follow each occurrence of the unwanted behavior. So for punishment to be effective, the person needs to be punished every single time they show that behavior. It's not very effective to have punishment occur sometimes after the misbehavior. Because really, if you think about it, if they're sometimes getting away with the behavior, they're sometimes getting reinforced for the behavior, that's putting them on an intermittent schedule of reinforcement. We know that those behaviors are very difficult to extinguish. So if you're going to use punishment, you want to make sure that every single time they perform the behavior, they're not getting a reinforcer, they're getting the punishment, and that will lead to decreasing the behavior effectively. You'll also want to make sure that the punishment is intense enough from the outset to suppress the targeted behavior. The reason for this is if you start out at the level of punishment that is too low to actually stop the behavior is going to continue. You're going to have to continue using punishment, and you're going to have to escalate that punishment over time in order to try to suppress the behavior because the initial use of punishment is not strong enough to stop the behavior. And what that does is that allows a person who is being punished to develop a tolerance for the punishment. So because the punishment is slowly increasing over time, they're getting used to higher and higher levels of punishment. So when you finally reach a very high level of punishment, they're used to it and they still don't react to it. So imagine if the first time you break a law, you get a very, very strict punishment or very, very harsh punishment for breaking the law. You're unlikely to break the law again. What tends to happen in our judicial system is that punishments increase over time. So the first time you break the law, you get a very light sentence, a very weak punishment. Over time, that increases. So by the time you get a hefty jail sentence, you become so accustomed to being punished that you don't react to it the same way as if you've gotten that hefty sentence in the very beginning. The punishment needs to be intense enough at the outset to suppress behaviors. In saying that, I don't want to suggest that I'm advocating for very hefty jail sentences for minor crimes, but theoretically, you want to make sure that the punishment initially is at least sufficient to stop the behavior. If not, then people tend to develop a tolerance for the punishment. Negative punishment is generally preferred to positive punishment. So taking away of things tends to be preferred to giving a punishment. So having them lose something that's repetitive tends to be what we tend to go with or prefer to go with, as opposed to giving a punishment, positive punishment like a spanking. And that's because negative punishments don't tend to have the same side effects that positive punishments do. So the emotional responses, the aggression, those types of issues don't seem to result from things like losing privileges, losing access to electronics the same way that they do from positive punishments like spanking. So you get fewer of those side effects if you use the negative punishments. Now, with individuals who have language capacity, punishment is more effective when accompanied by an explanation. So if you're going to punish your child for a bad behavior, you want to make sure that you also explain it to them. So help them to understand why they're being punished, why this is the punishment that you chose to follow this behavior, and what do you expect to see from them instead. So not only should this follow the punishment, this should precede the punishment, and that you tell them, hey, this is the behavior that I expect to see. If I don't see this behavior, this will be your punishment. So you want to make sure they understand what's going on so it doesn't just seem like an arbitrary punishment when it occurs. And finally, punishment of inappropriate behavior should be combined with positive reinforcement for appropriate behavior. So this touches upon two things that we've already discussed. First of all, differential reinforcement of other behaviors. If you're going to punish one behavior, you want to make sure that you're reinforcing a different behavior so that you don't cause those unwanted behaviors to be very resistant to extinction. You don't want those behaviors to stick around. You want to teach the person another avenue for getting the reinforcer that they're seeking. This also speaks to the idea that we talked about in the last lecture, that punishing bad behavior does not directly teach appropriate behavior. So if you're going to use punishment, you're going to punish the bad behavior. You also want to make sure at the same time you're reinforcing the appropriate behavior so that the person not only learns what not to do, but they learn what to do. They learn the appropriate behavior as well.